The G7 summit in Kananaskis, Canada, was in full swing when the unexpected happened. Cameras blinked in confusion. Journalists paused typing. World leaders glanced at their screens. President Trump abruptly stood, his dark suit stiff and resolute, excused himself from the closing dinner, and never returned. The summit's chair looked on, diplomatically composed, but the unspoken message resonated. Something had fractured. Overnight, it became global headlines. Trump leaves G7 early amid Iran-Israel crisis, appnews.com. He joined a U.S. National Security Council meeting, warning Tehran to evacuate amid escalating tensions in the Middle East. The walkout was seen not as duty, but drama, a calculated spectacle. Back on U.S. soil, the morning news machine's word. What does this mean for global unity? Asked anchors. Is this abandonment or leadership? Debated pundits. Trade deals with the UK and Canada, signed just hours before, were overshadowed. The world fixated on one question: why did he walk out? Social feeds exploded with gifs of Trump's stern exit, memes mocking the empty chair, and debates about his priorities. Washington speculated, was this defiance or dereliction? Meanwhile, in TV studios across the nation, producers scrambled. One live broadcast prioritized primetime over policy, booking Jasmine Crockett, the rising Congresswoman known for her fierce clarity. As the cameras warmed up, she sat composed under lights, framed between host and panelists. Sound cues readied her audio. Social producers cued trending topics in her lane. The pressure was real. Tonight would define more than policy, it would define character. 30 seconds before going live, she smoothed her blazer, looked down at the clipboard, then raised her eyes with deliberate calm. The host introduced, Congresswoman Crockett, thanks for joining. You've seen the news. What do you make of Trump walking out of G7? The audience leaned in. The panelists hushed. She inhaled, then spoke without hesitation. Well, it was brief, but the weight poured forward. She paused. Cameras zoomed. A Twitter monitor spotlighted her jawline tightening. We just watched a display, not of diplomacy, but of distraction. Leaving the table in times of crisis doesn't show leadership, it shows priorities. A cutaway. A CNN Chiron reading G7 chaos as Trump exits. She continued. This isn't a debate about trade now. It's about trust. When citizens expect unity from their leaders, they don't expect to see empty chairs at critical tables. The panelist to her left shifted uncomfortably. Even the host paused mid-note. That tension built, because this wasn't just reaction. It was restraint refining into rebuke. Then came the pivot. The host prompted. Donald Trump also made comments comparing political families. He mentioned Melania's poise. How does that tie into tonight's narrative? She looked directly into the camera, her gaze quiet but unflinching. Manners don't replace motives. Talking about poise, sure, nice on Instagram. But grit? That's forged in crisis. Poise doesn't move markets or calm violence. It doesn't evacuate civilians. It doesn't sit across world leaders when bombs are falling. That's leadership. A beat of silence, thicker than any applause. Producers held the beat. Social feeds crackled. Someone in the control room muttered, clip that. Now, behind the scenes, producers rummaged for her soundbite. Graphics popped, poise versus grit. Who leads? Comments scrolled. Did she just shade Melania? Or was it bigger? The panelist, flustered, replied, but poise matters too. Image is part of leadership. She met him again. Image without impact is empty. If we're celebrating looks over leverage, we're selling ourselves short. Live tweets flew. She just said what we're thinking. Poise versus grit. Frame her. That's the soundbite of the year. Moments later, post-show analytics lit up. #Poise's grit was trending. Clips hit 1 M views in minutes. In one corner, Trump's team was furious. They'd aimed to diminish Crockett. Now she'd reframed the entire narrative. His walkout, once a headline, became a backdrop to her critique. In studios across America, pundits scrambled to recalibrate. Conservative voices decried the moment as disrespectful to Melania, while liberal media framed it as a truth that compelled millions. A historian argued, this echoes statesmanship. Rather than sidestepping, she stepped into the narrative. A late-night host joke. Trump walks out, Crockett walks in. By midnight, stocks still fluctuated on world threats, but the vote of public opinion had already cast its ballot. One thing was certain. Tonight was no longer about G7 departure or diplomatic missteps. It was about who gets to define leadership on the world stage, and Jasmine Crockett had answered with words sharper than any exit. As the dust settled from the G7 fallout and Crockett's clip ricocheted across newsrooms, phones began ringing behind closed doors. Senate offices scrambled to prepare statements. Press secretaries stayed late, drafting measured responses. By dawn, opinion pages were ablaze, not just dissecting Trump's early departure, but trying to parse what Crockett's moment truly meant. CNN's early morning panel was packed. Every major political commentator had cleared their schedules. A former ambassador remarked, there's power in staying seated, and there's consequence in walking out. The question is, who leads by presence and who leads by exit? A younger correspondent added, Crockett's answer didn't just call out Trump, it challenged a generation of politicians who think theatrics count as diplomacy. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, Republican lawmakers were in damage control. Privately, several expressed frustration. We had a solid summit narrative, trade gains, UK alignment, and he just ditched the optics. One aide was caught on a hot mic. Why does he always need to make everything about him? But not everyone was dismayed. Right-wing influencers took a different angle. Twitter accounts with blue check marks posted side by sides of Trump's exit and Crockett's quote, accusing her of disrespecting diplomacy and attacking Melania. The irony? Crockett never said Melania's name. Still, it didn't stop the noise. Fox News flashed a segment, Who is Jasmine Crockett really? The chyron below read, Rising star or rising problem? They aired selective clips, editing out her policy points and emphasizing the phrase, poise doesn't move markets. The framing was deliberate, insinuate she'd slighted Melania, who'd remained largely apolitical. But back on MSNBC, the tone was different. She challenged the premise, not the person. This wasn't about fashion. This was about leadership, said one anchor. Another added, it's no longer enough to bring calm optics. We need bold voices. And Crockett just gave us that. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett wasn't watching the pundits. She was in a church basement in Texas, her district, attending a town hall that had been scheduled for weeks. No media, no handlers, just her, a folding chair, and a room full of constituents. She opened with humility. I didn't plan that moment. I planned to be honest. The crowd responded with quiet nods, claps, and murmurs of approval. An elderly woman stood and said, they always want us to look nice and say nothing. But you said it, and they couldn't look away. A young man added, you weren't trending. You were telling the truth. Her reply was measured. We've normalized exit strategies when things get tough. I'm saying we stay in the room. We deal with the hard stuff, even if it's uncomfortable. Word of her town hall spread, not because it was publicized, but because someone recorded a clip of her saying, this wasn't me trying to go viral. This was me refusing to go silent. That quote lit up Reddit. Gen Z dubbed it a new political mantra. TikTok creators mashed it with speeches, music, even anime scenes. A remix of her line over a Kendrick Lamar beat hit 5M views. She was no longer just a soundbite. She was becoming a cultural reference point. Even Trump noticed. In a Truth Social post, characteristically bold, he wrote, another angry, disrespectful voice. G7 was urgent. Real leaders act, not talk. Sad. Within minutes, Crockett clapped back. Not with insults, but with data. She tweeted a chart showing U.S. trade movement before and after G7, adding, "You walked out." The markets followed. Leadership isn't just movement, it's momentum. Analysts were stunned. She didn't insult. She educated. Her reply was retweeted over 100,000 times in 4 hours. By the following week, the moment had transcended politics. Cable news began using the phrase the Crockett shift to refer to the sudden change in how the public viewed female leadership, especially black female leadership, not just as competent, but as commanding. This wasn't about partisanship anymore. It was about presence. Crockett had shown that political power could be both unapologetic and precise, not a reaction, but a rebuke. And Washington didn't know how to handle it. At a press luncheon, a journalist half joked, "If Crockett so much as tweets the word foreign policy, half the GOP ducks." The laughter was nervous because it was true. Every offhand comment she made was now dissected for tone, for intent, for impact. Republicans attempted to frame the conversation around decorum. Senator Tom Cotton gave a speech on the Senate floor warning that incivility was becoming normalized. Though he didn't name her, everyone understood who he meant. The backlash was quick. Crockett responded on X, formerly Twitter, "I didn't raise my voice. I raised the question. Why does that scare you more?" The tweet racked up over 3 million views in a day. Her platform, once modest, ballooned overnight. Teen Vogue ran a cover feature titled "Jasmine Crockett Doesn't Blink." The Atlantic published an op-ed titled "Why the Establishment Misreads Black Women." Meanwhile, back at the White House, Trump's aides were frantic. Leaks suggested that the G7 walkout had been impulsive, not pre-planned. In private, Trump reportedly fumed, "I wasn't going to sit there and be lectured by Trudeau and Macron." His team struggled to spin it. Then a photo surfaced. It showed the exact moment Trump stood up, mid-summit, as other world leaders turned their heads in surprise. The expression on Merkel's face was disbelief. Macron looked irritated. The image went viral, captioned simply, "He left. She stayed." Not long after, Crockett appeared on a late-night podcast. The host asked her, "Did you know that moment was going to define the news cycle?" She shook her head. "Not even close. I didn't script it. I just spoke the part no one else would." Then she leaned forward. "We've spent too many years rewarding retreat. I'm done applauding people who leave hard rooms." That quote made it to the front page of Politico the next day. Elsewhere, Trump's defenders were losing ground. Former press secretary Kayleigh McEnany tried to defend his actions, saying he had urgent intelligence briefings. But insiders revealed there was no such meeting on the official schedule. The excuse fell apart quickly. Conservative pundits tried to paint Crockett as divisive, but the clips they aired only further highlighted her clarity. In one such clip, she said calmly, "It's not divisive to demand presence from our president. It's duty." The backlash to her critics was swift. #Crockett was right trended on social media for 72 straight hours. Progressive PACs started fundraising off the moment, and in 3 days, she raised more than $1.2 million in small dollar donations. She redirected most of the money toward education grants in underserved districts, a move that further elevated her standing. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign faced growing scrutiny. His decision to exit the summit was framed by some as an abandonment of American allies at a critical time. As geopolitical tensions rose, particularly with emerging crises in Eastern Europe, his absence became more than symbolic. It was policy negligence. At the next NATO briefing, a European diplomat was quoted saying, "We now look to Congress for leadership, not the Oval." That quote made front-page news in the Washington Post. It was rare, even unprecedented, for international figures to dismiss a sitting U.S. president so openly. The Trump camp responded with bluster, blaming globalist elites and liberal media spin. But back in the U.S., the narrative had shifted. Crockett was invited to speak at a university lecture series on democracy and global responsibility. Her speech went viral. She said, "Our global relationships don't hinge on bravado. They hinge on reliability. You cannot build trust on the foundation of a disappearing act. Her message resonated. Students cheered. Faculty applauded. Even international students, many from countries that watched the G7 fallout in disbelief, said she gave them hope that someone in U.S. leadership understood diplomacy was not just about photo ops, but follow through. At the next press briefing, Crockett was asked about the mounting Republican pushback. She shrugged. They've mistaken volume for strength and silence for strategy. Neither wins wars. Neither signs treaties. Then she added something sharper. If your entire campaign strategy is built on leaving, then don't be surprised when the people choose someone who stays. The comment was interpreted as a not-so-subtle warning. Rumors had begun swirling that Crockett was being considered as a potential VP pick for a future Democratic ticket. She dismissed them publicly, but privately, insiders said she was being vetted. The Trump campaign attempted to regain control of the narrative. Melania Trump released a rare statement. The president acts with strength, not show. But the moment came too late. It felt reactionary, a footnote, not a headline. What made Crockett's presence more powerful wasn't just what she said, it was when she said it. She didn't wait for the post-summit spin. She challenged the premise in real time. The contrast was striking. Trump had left the room. She had filled it. And now, whether Republicans liked it or not, Jasmine Crockett had become more than a name. She was a movement. A student-led campaign called Stay in the Room began organizing teach-ins around political accountability. They wore T-shirts with Crockett's quote and held sessions breaking down summit diplomacy, exit optics, and how media bias plays into coverage of Black women in power. Even Michelle Obama weighed in, not naming names, but in a speech at a university in California, she said, "When women speak up, we're often told we're loud. When we take space, we're told we're aggressive. But staying in the room isn't a threat. It's leadership." The audience gave a standing ovation. On X, Crockett quote tweeted the speech with a simple, "Thank you." That one tweet was screenshotted, printed, and posted across offices, dorms, and classrooms. In the political echo chamber, everyone understood. Crockett was no longer reacting to Trump. She was defining the opposition to him, not by yelling louder, but by standing still and letting him trip over his own exits. Back in Washington, several moderate Republicans began questioning Trump's viability in 2028. One GOP consultant said, "If this becomes the Crockett-Trump contrast in swing states, we've got a problem." And so, the damage control deepened. Trump held a rally where he called Crockett a nobody congresswoman with a big mouth. The crowd cheered. But outside, protesters held signs that read, "Still in the room." The visual contrast was jarring. One side, shouting, fists raised. The other, calm, collected, quoting policy briefs. Cable news couldn't get enough. And still, Crockett refused to center herself in the narrative. In a local interview back in Texas, she said, "This moment isn't about me. It's about making sure no president, Republican or Democrat, ever thinks disappearing from duty is acceptable." That humility, paired with unrelenting clarity, made her bulletproof. She didn't just survive the headlines. She rewrote them. The days following the explosive G7 moment brought a slow but seismic unraveling inside the Republican inner circle. They'd always relied on control, controlling the narrative, the timing, the optics. But Jasmine Crockett had shifted the tempo of political confrontation in a way they hadn't anticipated. And worse for them, she did it without shouting. Cable networks began doing split-screen segments. On one side, Trump, leaving the G7 table mid-discussion, face set in defiance. On the other, Crockett, leaning into the mic at the press briefing room, dissecting policy gaps with surgical precision. The imagery was stark, the symbolism? Damning. Fox News struggled to recalibrate. Their usual talking points, Democrat chaos, radical left, woke politics, weren't sticking. Crockett wasn't disorganized, radical, or performatively progressive. She was sharp, calm, and deeply informed. Tucker Carlson had once mocked her for talking like a professor, but now even his former viewers were tuning in to listen. There was a new problem. She wasn't entertaining the fight, she was reframing the ring. And then came the memo leak. An internal Republican National Committee document circulated, advising lawmakers to avoid direct confrontation with Crockett in media engagements. The memo described her as agile on camera, dangerous in debate, and likely to frame GOP responses as emotionally reactive. The document was meant to be internal, but someone leaked it. When MSNBC flashed the memo on screen during a segment, the reaction online was instant. One commentator quipped, "She's not just playing chess. She designed the board." Crockett responded to the memo on her personal Instagram story with a short clip of her sipping tea. The caption read, "Y'all scared of little ol' me?" The story alone got over 4 million views. And this wasn't just a momentary buzz. Jasmine Crockett was becoming a cultural marker, a symbol of female power that wasn't seeking validation. Vogue profiled her wardrobe. Forbes broke down her media strategy. Harvard invited her to guest lecture on political communication. Meanwhile, her approval ratings in her Texas district surged. But it wasn't without consequence. Behind the scenes, Crockett began receiving increased security detail. Threats, some anonymous, others overt, poured in. A note was slipped under her office door. "You should have kept quiet like the others." She didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned into the work. In an unexpected move, Crockett requested access to transcripts from the G7 climate and trade discussions that Trump had skipped out on. She said, publicly, "If the president won't be briefed, I will. Someone has to be accountable for the global stage." That line was quoted by the BBC, Le Monde, and the Sydney Morning Herald. She was no longer just an American voice. She had become international, a counterweight to Trump's absence. And then, a new twist emerged. An investigative piece by ProPublica revealed that Trump's team had attempted to suppress internal White House footage of the G7 exit. Multiple angles had captured audio of him saying, "I don't need this garbage," before storming out. The footage, though suppressed, was leaked to a freelance journalist. The audio dropped on a Thursday night. It hit like a bomb. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about Crockett responding to Trump. It was about Trump reacting to her presence, even before she spoke. The freelance journalist revealed that in the minutes before walking out, Trump had asked the staffer, "Is that Crockett? She's the loud one, right?" The implication. He left not because of world leaders, but because he anticipated confrontation. A sitting president, ducking debate with a freshman congresswoman? That alone ignited a firestorm. CNN played the clip every hour. The New York Times ran the headline, "President walked out to avoid Crockett," sources say. Even some right-wing outlets began questioning the optics. One op-ed in the Washington Examiner read, "It's a bad look for a president to be outmaneuvered and outclassed by a first-term Democrat." And yet Crockett remained steady. In an appearance on Face the Nation, she was asked about the audio leak. Her response was surgical. "I wasn't in the room when he walked out. But now I wonder if I didn't have to say anything at all. My presence, my being, was enough." That phrase, "my being was enough," exploded online. Activists, writers, and academics took to social media. For many Black women, it crystallized a reality they had long known but rarely heard acknowledged on national platforms. Being powerful in your presence alone, without shouting, without anger, was enough to scare the highest levels of power. Crockett's team turned the quote into merchandise. All proceeds went to community legal defense funds. As summer gave way to fall, the echo of Trump's G7 walkout hadn't faded. If anything, the ripple had turned into a wave. Political commentators couldn't stop referencing the moment. Every time a public figure dodged a debate or press conference, someone inevitably said, "Another Trump-Crockett moment." It had become shorthand, a symbol of political evasion in the face of truth. But Crockett hadn't rested on the moment. She pressed forward. While the former president spent his post G7 weeks lashing out at the media, golfing in silence, or giving combative interviews, Crockett was building something much bigger, a coalition. The Accountability Caucus, as it came to be known, was her idea. A bipartisan alliance of lawmakers, younger, tech-savvy, and fed up with performative politics, came together quietly. They weren't all Democrats. Some were moderate Republicans who had grown tired of Trumpian tactics. And while Crockett didn't publicly frame herself as their leader, internally, they all knew who had catalyzed the energy. They were done being reactive. They wanted transparency, real-time digital town halls, and legislative accountability. And when Crockett announced that she would be introducing the Public Process Access Act, people took notice. The bill aimed to create an open digital repository of unclassified executive branch meetings and decision-making summaries, including absences, votes, walkouts, and resignations. It was bold. Some called it radical transparency. Others called it naive. Trump's allies? They called it an attack. In one radio interview, Steve Bannon accused Crockett of trying to create a surveillance state under the pretense of openness. But the bill's early support proved him wrong. Independents loved it. Younger voters championed it. Even libertarians, traditionally wary of centralized power, found themselves intrigued by its decentralization promises. The White House? Silent until the next blow came. An enterprising tech journalist obtained metadata from an internal White House server. It showed that in the 48 hours following Trump's G7 walkout, multiple officials had accessed and attempted to edit a file labeled G7 Exit, comm strategy. One of the attempted edits included removing a timestamp that confirmed Trump's early departure was not pre-scheduled. The implication was clear. There had been an attempted cover-up. Crockett pounced. In a televised hearing, she held up a printed version of the document and said, without raising her voice, "We cannot operate on vibes and ego. Governance is not mood-based. The people deserve to know who's in the room and why." The clip went viral again. This time, it wasn't just her supporters cheering. Veteran journalists, legal scholars, and political moderates all acknowledged she was crafting a new playbook for political responsibility. Meanwhile, Trump retreated further into grievance politics. In rallies, he screamed about witch hunts, deep state lies, and traitor Democrats. But the more he shouted, the smaller he seemed next to Crockett's poise. She wasn't even responding to him directly anymore. And that, in many ways, was more damaging. By not treating him as her primary adversary, she made him irrelevant to her movement. Then came the moment no one expected. During a panel on democratic reforms at Stanford University, Crockett was asked if she'd ever consider running for higher office. She paused, laughed gently, then said, "My job isn't to aim up, it's to reach out. The people need fewer celebrities and more public servants." Thunderous applause. The clip trended worldwide. That same night, conservative commentators scrambled. Some tried to mock her as fake humble. Others warned their audiences, "She's more dangerous than AOC because she doesn't seem like she wants the spotlight." But in framing her this way, they only amplified her power. Crockett wasn't just making waves, she was changing the tide. And the numbers backed it up. Polling released by Gallup showed that Crockett's national recognition had surged by over 35% since the G7. Among likely voters under 35, she had a 74% approval rating. Even among suburban voters, a key 2024 demographic, her favorability outpaced many sitting senators. One analyst wrote, "She speaks plainly. She listens deeply. And most importantly, she doesn't flinch." That's rare in this town. At a House committee meeting on government ethics, Crockett introduced a clause requiring real-time reporting of executive travel paid by taxpayer dollars. A Republican colleague challenged her, asking if she was trying to embarrass former presidents. She responded, "No, sir. I'm trying to prevent future embarrassment. Silence. Then applause. For the first time in months, Trump addressed her directly in a tweet. Crockett is just another loudmouth socialist with no experience. A total fake. The response was swift. Her team posted a side-by-side graphic on Twitter. On the left, Trump walking out of the G7. On the right, Crockett walking into a congressional ethics committee. Caption: loud enough to be heard, steady enough to lead. It garnered 3.2 million likes in 24 hours. By this point, even late-night hosts had picked sides. Colbert praised her wit. Trevor Noah ran a segment called The Crockett Doctrine. Meanwhile, conservative hosts struggled. Some even began begging for Democrats to send someone else into interviews, anyone but Crockett. But she never gloated. In fact, Crockett made it a point to remind her followers that she wasn't the story. On Instagram, she posted a handwritten note from a single mother in Michigan, thanking her for introducing the Public Process Access Act. Crockett's caption: this is the real headline. Still, the momentum wasn't just grassroots. In a closed-door Democratic strategy meeting, senior members floated her name for several leadership roles, not ceremonial ones, but real policy influence. Normally, such a rise would take years. She was doing it in months. Republican operatives knew this. They began ramping up opposition research, scrubbing her law school records, interviewing former coworkers, hoping to find something, anything, to slow her down. They found nothing scandalous. But one attempted hit piece tried to portray her as too calm, too measured, as if scripted. It backfired. Voters were tired of chaos. They wanted discipline, precision, focus. Crockett embodied all three. And yet, she remained grounded. In a town hall broadcast live on YouTube, she told her constituents, "Don't make me the hero of this story. Make yourselves the authors of the next one." That line, again, went viral. Within a day, educators were printing it on posters in civics classrooms. But the real shift came when a well-respected Republican senator, off camera, was caught on a hot mic saying, "If we had 10 Crockett's in our party, we'd still be running the show." The audio leaked. Not even Trump could ignore it. The next day, in a rambling Truth Social post, he raged, "Crockett isn't smart. She's just being used by the media. Don't fall for it, people." But no one was falling anymore. The contrast had become impossible to ignore. One was rage without strategy. The other, strategy without noise. And in the final days of that news cycle, Crockett appeared once more on the Hill, not for a hearing, not for a speech, but for a small ribbon cutting at a tech literacy center in D.C. A reporter asked her if she was worried about becoming too popular to be effective. She smiled. Power that comes from the people doesn't need protection. It needs purpose. As the camera cut, a young girl behind her whispered to her mother, "She talks like a superhero." Her mother smiled back. "She acts like one too." By the time October rolled in, Washington wasn't just talking about Jasmine Crockett anymore. It was watching her. Every hearing she attended drew more press than usual. Her committee appearances were clipped, subtitled, and distributed across platforms like YouTube, TikTok, and even conservative corners of Rumble and Truth Social. Whether critics loved her or loathed her, they all agreed. This wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. Donald Trump's walkout at the G7 had lost its edge. What once looked like defiance had become a tired symbol of political chaos. Voters, especially in swing districts, started talking about Trump fatigue. Meanwhile, Crockett's approval among independents continued to climb. Her speeches weren't designed to go viral. They did because they were authentic. Trump, back in Mar-a-Lago, launched what insiders called a revenge tour, a string of meetings with loyalists aimed at regaining momentum. But every attempt to strike back at Crockett fell flat. Each insult only elevated her further. International media started paying attention. The BBC aired a special titled "The Leader Who Walked Out," chronicling the G7 debacle. European outlets reported that leaders privately mocked Trump's departure and praised Crockett for her composure, even though she hadn't attended. She had become the summit's most remembered name. Back in the US, late-night shows kept the story alive. SNL opened with Trump storming out while a calm Crockett narrated the scene like a documentary. It went viral. Even Fox News reluctantly aired the sketch. Every time her name was mentioned, ratings climbed. But Crockett didn't get distracted. Her team quietly declined offers for TV shows, podcasts, even brand partnerships. That's not why she's here. One aide told Politico she didn't come to be famous. She came to govern. Her Public Process Access Act kept gaining traction. 3 Republican senators, pressured by younger voters in their districts, signed on as co-sponsors. Civic groups like the League of Women Voters and Common Cause endorsed it. Gen Z activists adopted it as a litmus test. If your rep didn't support it, they were hiding something. Trump's circle grew anxious. Their strategy, ignore her, mock her, had failed. She was becoming a new benchmark for political integrity. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't posting. She was doing the work. Then, Crockett went to Iowa, not for a rally or a campaign, just a town hall in a high school gym focused on youth voting. The line wrapped around the block. Parents, teachers, teens, all waiting in the cold. When she spoke, she didn't mention Trump once. Don't follow the noise. Follow the work, she said. Power doesn't live in headlines. It lives in how we show up for each other, especially when no one's watching. That line was shared more than 6 million times within a day. Cable panels debated her rise. Some said she was too new. Others claimed she didn't want the spotlight. But voters had made up their minds. Her approval numbers kept rising, outpacing not just Republican rivals, but many seasoned Democrats. Then came the Oversight Committee hearing, executive accountability in the modern age. It should have been routine. But Crockett was invited to lead the questioning. The witness, a former G7 logistics coordinator who leaked internal memos. Under oath, he confirmed Trump's walkout had not been authorized. He said cabinet members were caught off guard. He revealed that staff had tried to alter briefing documents to hide the optics. Crockett leaned in and asked, "Is it your testimony that the leader of the free world walked out on his international counterparts, then directed his staff to cover up the optics of that exit?" The witness nodded. "Yes, Congresswoman. That is my testimony." The clip exploded. It wasn't partisan. It was a matter of national integrity. Legal experts, foreign diplomats, and undecided voters all took notice. Trump hadn't just thrown a tantrum, he had undermined American credibility. The White House had no comment. Trump's team released a short statement calling it revisionist history. But it didn't matter. Crockett had turned a viral moment into a precedent. And she did it without bitterness. She wasn't tearing things down. She was building something better. That's when Time magazine called. They wanted her for their Leaders of the Next Era cover. Not because of Trump, but because of what she represented. A new kind of politics, calm, principled, effective. She agreed, with one condition: no Capitol Hill backdrop. The photo would be taken in a public library. In the final shot, she sat next to a young student reading how government works. That image told the story. The Trump era still loomed. But something else had arrived, not waiting in the wings, but already shaping the future. Jasmine Crockett had walked through the storm. She wasn't just standing. She was leading. And now, the country was following.